Senator Lindsey Graham has a concerning solution for the lack of information surrounding the Trump assassination attempt. And in the Olympics, a women's boxer throws in the towel just 46 seconds into her match against a biological male opponent. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Thursday, August 1st. According to the Department of Defense, the three men accused of plotting the 9/11 attacks have reached a plea deal. In exchange for the prosecution agreeing not to seek the death penalty, the men agreed to plead guilty to all charged offenses, including the murder of 2,976 people. However, specific details of the pretrial agreement are not yet publicly available, but the White House has made sure to distance itself from the deal.
And does he have a message to some of the 9/11 families who wanted to see a full trial, who wanted to see this kind of come to a fuller process?
So look, this is basically what Jake said. This is something that we had no involvement in. He didn't have any involvement in. And so the White House played no role in this process. And the president directed his team to consult as appropriate with officials and lawyers and Department of Defense, obviously. We have said this before. We are, our hearts go out to the families who lost the loved ones on that day. The president on 9/11 has honored them every year, and the families who lost their loved one on that terrible day.
Here to discuss is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze Media, as well as FBI whistleblower and Center for Renewing America senior fellow Steve Friend. Steve, this is one of the worst attacks that we've ever seen on this country. So why are we now making the decision 23 years later to say, okay, let's give them a plea deal?
Well, this is the byproduct of a gross stew of people that are involved at the upper levels of our government at this point. There are the system people, there are the outcome people, and there are the outcome people who pretend to be system people. System people being the prosecutors here who just want to get a W. Give me a plea. That's a conviction. That's a win. Get this off my plate. Let me move on and say that I got the conviction in the 9/11 case. Why don't you move me up as a careerist? You have the outcome people, Khalif Sheikh Mohammed, who is just laughing at the desecration of our judicial system, of our system itself here, where we've allowed him to live here for a quarter of a century and provided him shelter and food. And he was all too happy to give up his life for that cause, but I'm sure he'll live the next several decades on our dime continually. And then last, you have the outcome people pretending to be system people. And those are the people that pulled the wool over the eyes of the American people, wrapped themselves in the flag and pretended to be all about patriotism. And they got us to sign up for things like the Patriot Act. They gave the FBI the national security responsibility, the ability to look at innocent Americans and spy on them, and got young men to join the military and go overseas so that they could hit their bottom line with Lockheed Martin and Boeing. It's an utter desecration of our system.
Steve, I appreciate those comments. I mean, before we get into some of the details, don't you think what's really at stake here is mainstream America's understanding and faith in the rule of law in this country?
I do. I think there's an aspect to it, too, because people genuinely don't understand about a fair process, and that what the goal of the government should be here is to pursue the fair process. And why do we have laws? The other thing that people forget about when it comes to laws is we have this message of why do we have it? The question is, do we have laws to ensure justice, to provide just outcomes for victims of crime, to ensure that we live in a civil society, or do we live in a system that creates laws to give more power to the government to go after innocent Americans? And we have now transitioned into that latter state here. And I mean, I just hope and pray that this type of outcome, the utter miscarriage of justice that we all witnessed, can be the shot in the side of the head that so many people need to wake up and see what's going on with their own government.
I want to switch gears with you and go back to the Trump assassination attempt now. And earlier today, you posted on X about the FBI's potential classification of that event as domestic terrorism. Can you explain why that classification would be so significant for this?
There was an exchange between Deputy Director Paul Abate and Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, where to the lay person, it seems reasonable. The FBI wants to open up all avenues, remove the blindfold, have no blinders on, consider the fact that this could be assassination, this could be domestic terrorism, all outlets on the table. However, to the non-lay person, to the subject matter expert, when you designate something as a domestic terrorist investigation, that enables you to make it classified. And when you have a classification code on there, you have to have a need to know and a security clearance. So now the FBI has set itself up to walk back into the Senate chamber during a hearing and say, I'm sorry, you don't have a right to that information. I can't reveal sources and methods. We can't reveal information about an ongoing investigation. You don't have the need to know where the necessary clearances. And now the American people are not going to have the transparency that we ultimately need for this investigation.
And earlier this week, Acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe testified in the Senate oversight hearing about the assassination attempt. And Lindsey Graham had a very concerning solution for the issues with the investigation. Let's listen to that quick.
We have encrypted apps of an assassin, a murderer, and we can't get into them all these days after. That needs to be fixed, folks. I'm all for privacy, but to a point. What if in the future somebody's using these apps to communicate with a foreign power? I think we need to know these things. We need to know them in real time.
Steve, can you explain what Lindsey Graham is trying to propose there for the American people and how that would really affect privacy rights in the United States?
Well, it effectively makes the Fourth Amendment dead letter at that point. They want a lawful access, a skeleton key to encrypted communications that we all have. I mean, if you have Signal chat or WhatsApp or something to that effect, even iMessage is encrypted. But Senator Graham has proposed in the past and co-sponsored legislation that would give the FBI the backdoor access to those applications for real time, which means continually monitoring it. This is the government assuming that a tool will be used for ill when it is just a tool because we don't trust the government in this country. The job of law enforcement is not supposed to be easy. You're supposed to have a reasonable suspicion, probable cause. The burden is supposed to be there. They do not need these tools. It's no different than saying locks are bad. I use a lock on my house. I use a lock on my car, keep my family and my belongings safe. But because I can use a lock to put someone in a closet and kidnap them, now we have to remove locks. It's no different. The analogy holds.
Steve, yesterday, the New York Times and many others are already starting to chime in saying some Republicans are embracing conspiracy theories when it comes to the assassination. This is no surprise, but what boggles my mind is that the fact pattern here is going to make the JFK assassination look like a buttoned up, straightforward event. And, already they're throwing this around. Do you have any thoughts about this?
I think that there's any sort of allegation about malfeasance on the hands of the federal government here in the handling of what goes on, that'll be easily chalked up as conspiracy theory because those agencies want to protect their image, this myth of competence that they have. Here, you can make all the conspiracy allegations you want, but it presupposes one thing, that the Secret Service is always perfect and on point except for this one time. It's my contention that these sorts of lapses have been going on in a regular fashion, and the manpower has been shortened because of the decisions made on high. And it's just happened to be this one time in Butler, Pennsylvania, that the subject decided to take action. And we're lucky he didn't before then. And we need to create these changes now so that nothing can happen in the near future, as a whistleblower came out and said he feared there would be another attack within the next 30 days.
Yeah, we heard from Senator Johnson yesterday. He was talking about all the conspiracy theories. Well, you're going to have all of those things come up, but the antidote to a conspiracy theory is more information. And the Secret Service has yet to provide that level of information where people have to just stop and actually sit back and say, okay, maybe we are getting some of the facts of the case coming out. So at what point will we ever get that information, that level of information that is needed?
when our elected officials are actually willing to hold these agencies accountable and pull their funding entirely unless they're going to be brought to heel. The FBI, the Secret Service, all federal law enforcement exists in this bubble where the expectations of them are so low. What people don't realize is if you're an FBI agent, you only have to do one investigative action on a case every 90 days. From their perspective, 60 days cuts their time down significantly. The ask of them is actually really great at that point. These people have a myth of competence that just frankly isn't true, and they need to address that and bring them up to the standard that we all sort of have this expectation that's completely false because we watch TV and movies.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Steve. I mean, as soon as this happened, one of the first things that I said, just as editor-in-chief here, is if they don't put out information, it's going to cause problems. And it's almost as if they want to do that. So that being said, that's what they're doing. What do you think the viable path is to actually get to the truth here? What are the chances of that? And what does that look like? How is that going to happen?
For me, it's going to come up to the funding battle that we're going to have in Congress. And I think that one of the leverage points that the House Republicans should use is we're going to have an independent investigation. Let's bring on some actual experienced investigators, give them the resources and the power, run it parallel with the FBI. The FBI has proven itself to be politically partisan and inept. I mean, they said the baseball shooting wasn't even an assassination attempt. They have to be dismissed entirely. There needs to be a parallel investigation that is fully transparent with daily briefings. Let's pretend like we're back in the coronavirus days and we have to have the doctors coming out and providing updates to the American people. We're at that level now, and we should be able to devote some of the resources toward this and let it be a shot across the bow of the FBI and say, hey, look, we just got some independent guys that did a better job than you. Maybe we don't, after all, need all the power to be at your fingertips.
It's interesting you say that because Florida Representative Corey Mills has come out and said that he is going to start funding a parallel investigation. Steve Friend, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Coming up, a victory for feminism. It's a biological male forcing a female boxer to quit in their Olympic matchup. If you're paying attention to the news, you know that it's crazy times out there. And the best way to go about crazy times is to have a feeling of security for yourself and your family. And you can do that financially. You can do that with gold and silver. They're an excellent way to diversify your savings because they are a hedge against inflation. It's a physical asset that is in high demand globally from the wealth at all the central banks. There's a reason why all the central banks are out there buying physical gold right now. So go through my friends at Birch Gold Group and own your own physical gold and silver in a tax-sheltered retirement account. You can diversify with an old IRA or a 401k with no money out of your pocket into an IRA of gold and silver. It's the one thing that you can do to make sure that your family's savings are actually going to be there when you need it. Text Jill to 989898 and receive a free, no obligation info kit and learn the role that precious metals play in your overall strategy to save. Again, text Jill to 989898. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of happy customers, you can trust Birch Gold like I do. Be sure to text Jill to 989898. Today, Algerian boxer Imane Khelif won their match in 46 seconds after Italy's Angelina Carini dropped out. Khelif was previously disqualified from competing by the International Boxing Association after a genetic test revealed that they have XY chromosomes and reportedly a high level of testosterone. After speaking about her decision to drop out, Carini explained that I got into the ring to fight. I didn't give up, but one punch hurt too much. So I said enough. So here to discuss this is Allie Beth Stuckey, host of Relatable on BlazeTV. So Allie, thanks for joining us today. Do you think that this is going to be the moment that people wake up to the problem of men competing against women?
There's a lot of misinformation, competing misinformation out there about this person, about whether or not he is actually female, but in reality, he is a male. As you said, he has XY chromosomes. I don't know any woman who has XY chromosomes. And so this is a man. From what I understand, he was born with testes and he has some kind of DSD, which is differently sexed disorder that only affects males. And so a lot of people out there are defending him, saying that he is a woman when in fact he is not. He might have some disorder, but he has more testosterone because he was born with testicles, and that should disqualify you. If he wanted to go do some other event, if he wanted to go do handball or archery or ping pong, I would have less of a problem with it. But you're not going to convince me that this person has pure intentions when he decided that the event that he would compete in is hand-to-hand combat with women who he knows are a lot smaller and weaker than him.
Allie, I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that I live in a society in which if he had called her a cat lady, there would be more controversy in the mainstream press. At the same time, though, most people have to be against this, right? I mean, most people have to be against this. How did we get here?
Well, I think we could go back a long way. We could go back to feminism in some ways, which basically said that men and women are interchangeable. You could go back to Obergefell, which basically said the same thing. Trans women are women is the same math as love, because you are saying that men and women are really no different, that they're just interchangeable, that they're basically the same. Feminist ideology said the same thing. Gosh, you could go all the way back to the Garden of Eden when Satan really attacked human nature and made us confused about gender roles from the very beginning. But I really do think it can come down to godlessness. Godlessness leads to chaos. It leads to disorder. It leads to confusion. We exchange the God of Scripture for the God of self. The God of self thinks it can declare an identity based on what it speaks. And that's what transgenderism is. So, I mean, that's the big picture of how we got here. And then there's lots of little policy ways as well. But I really do think it goes back to a spiritual problem.
I know that a lot of people go through, and when they talk about transgenderism, they do it in the world of sports. I think it's an easy way for people to just say, look at the differences here. Is this issue, though, is this what it's going to be? Is this one going to be big enough? Everybody has been talking about it all day. This is something that has, I think, resonated with a lot of people. Is that going to turn the tide this time?
I don't think it's going to be this one thing. Hopefully it's a lot of little things, or, I mean, seemingly smaller things. It might not just be this one Olympic level event that turns the tide, but I am very thankful to see people like Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling and other very powerful mainstream voices. Donald Trump posted something about this, even people like Jake and Logan Paul. Those are not all of them, like Jake and Logan Paul, they're not really people that you think of as conservative cultural warriors. And so if it's reaching that segment of the population, not just like the conservative Christian like me, who is reading Genesis 1 and realizing this is crazy, but who can just see with their own eyes, okay, this is insane. We've got a man who is trying to knock out a woman. We're basically commercializing domestic violence. I do think it is part of the case that we are building. Absolutely.
Now, that's promising. Do you think that plays into the election at all then? Do you think in 2024 we'll see this play out in the election in a bigger way than we have in the past?
Well, if Republicans are smart, and that is a huge if, as you guys know, they should absolutely pin Kamala Harris on this, because Kamala Harris does believe that a man can become a woman. She is all for that. She has sacrificed everything on the altar of the LGBTQ lobby, and she has pushed for this idea of mutilating children's bodies in the name of gender confusion, and also for men being in sports and spaces that belong to women. That is who Kamala Harris is, because she is a mean girl. She's a mean person. She's a bully. She's always had it out for the most vulnerable, whether it's the baby inside the womb or whether it's the vulnerable female athlete. And so if she is not against the commercialization of domestic violence, which we seem to have seen in the Olympic octagon, or in the ring rather, then she needs to tell us that. I would love to know her position on men who identify as women beating up women.
You went through and named a lot of the influencers and Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the like, but every time that we get an issue like this, the governing bodies that be never go along with it, right? The IOC put out a statement today on X saying that they are saddened by the abuse that two athletes are facing because there are currently two male boxers right now in the Olympic Games that are competing against the females. And they said that they condemned the misleading information. But is it fair to eliminate the people with the XY chromosomes from the women's events, even despite what these governing bodies are saying and the fairness of everything?
Well, of course, because they have XY chromosomes, so that makes them a man. And if you have testicles, then you are producing testosterone at a much higher rate than women. And that affects every single part of your body. That affects your brain, that affects your lungs, that affects your heart, your muscle mass, your bones, the size of your hands and feet, all of those things. He has such a distinct physical advantage. I mean, there's obviously a reason why you don't see this ever going the other direction. When a woman is supposedly intersex or thinks that she is the opposite sex, thinks that she's a man, she's never like, hey, sign me up for male boxing. I'll take on, Conor McGregor in the next UFC fight. You just don't see it. There's a reason why you only see this going one direction, and it's because women are a lot easier to beat up.
So what do you think the next step is for the right in countering this? I mean, we can't just say, oh, look at the video, this is terrible. What do you think the next rhetorical part of the fight is?
I do think that that's a huge part of it. I do think showing people, look, this is a man who is beating up a woman. And I think that if journalists were worth their salt, which most of them are not, they would press Kamala Harris on this. They would press her and say, are you for this? Even if it's not just talking about this Olympic scenario, any scenario, like, are you for men competing in women's sports and why? What about this scenario? What about that scenario? What about contact sports? And go on and on. Give her specific scenarios where women have lost out on scholarships, where they have been injured in different athletic events because of the men who have been competing with them, the women who are subjected to basically exhibitionism in locker rooms because of these men, fully intact men who say that they're women. Make her answer for every single one of those specific scenarios and see if she supports them. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that she'll ever be in a situation where she is asked tough questions like that.
And Allie, I know you have more of this on your episode of Relatable today on Blaze TV, and you can listen to that wherever you get your podcast. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Allie.
Thanks, guys.
Next, Senator JD Vance lets Americans know what the border czar has done to become president. Up next. JD Vance visited the southern border today and bashed Kamala Harris for the Biden administration's lax on their border policies and their tragic effects.
It's hard to believe until you see it with your own eyes just how bad the policies of the Kamala Harris administration have been when it comes to the southern border. They started their administration. Kamala Harris came into office making promises, and she kept those promises to open the American southern border. They stopped deportations on day one. They stopped construction of the border wall on day one. We see the border wall sitting here, ready to be completed behind us, and that can't happen because of Kamala Harris's administration. They reinstated catch and release, and they stopped remain in Mexico. So all of these asylum claimants who come to our border, they can now get released into our country because they're not forced to stay in Mexico while we adjudicate their asylum claims. And we have to remember that as terrible and idiotic as these policies were, they cause real human beings to suffer.
Joining us now to help break it all down is Chris Bedford, senior politics editor for Blaze Media. And Chris, I'm so glad that you're here. I unwillfully put you on vacation yesterday. We have one more day with you. And I'm glad because we have JD Vance here at the border. So is stuff like this actually going to help them win some undecided voters in this election?
Yeah, they have to get past all the glitter that's being thrown in their eyes by the Harris campaign. Kamala and the media have tried a number of pretty substantive attacks on JD Vance. Weird is obviously the most obvious one. Now, I know that the democracy dies in darkness speech wasn't working, and that donors were angry about that, and that Joe Biden's people were insisting that that was the only way forward because they needed Joe Biden to somehow be a sellable candidate. But it wasn't moving voters. So they started going with these dumb attacks like weird and making up stories about couches. And for the last week, you've heard a lot of what they've claimed about JD Vance, but you actually haven't seen a whole lot of the man himself. He's an extremely impressive individual, someone who rose out of poverty in a broken family, who's taken care of by his grandmother, who tells a very American story, one that resonates with the Rust Belt, someone who went through an extremely difficult primary in Ohio to run for Senate, very different from Kamala Harris's example in the Democratic primary, to win, and then someone who came to D.C. and as opposed to being like normal Republicans who just talk the talk but don't actually legislate to make any kinds of differences on a more populist agenda, usually still want to take care of their friends, he's butted heads with his own colleagues in the Senate to push back against special interests and push a populist agenda. And now you see him down here talking about immigration. Now, immigration is a huge problem, and for most people who don't live in the southern border, until the last couple of years, it was not one that you could really wrap your head around. You'd seen the movies, you'd seen An American Tale with the Feifel, and you kind of thought this maybe was a romantic thing. It wasn't a cartel-run operation, that there wasn't just a bunch of young men by the millions streaming over. And you also could be convinced that this problem was intractable. Congress couldn't do anything about it. Nothing could stop it. Well, the Donald Trump administration proved in 2016 to 2020 that it can be brought to a near trickle. And then Joe Biden's administration proved how quickly that can be undone with actual policy. So to go down there and to highlight that when immigration's hitting people in Chicago, Boston, Portland, well, that's a good thing for getting those votes.
Chris, great Feifel Moskowitz reference. We all got it here. Most people, let me just put it this way. I'm having a black pill Thursday, okay? I'm just going to lay that out there. Most people in this country, I think by every poll and everything I've seen, want a border as opposed to not having a border. An open border is not a border. Countries have borders. Most people are for that. But most people are also, I think, for not letting men punch women in the face. And most people also know that people who have testicles are, in fact, male. So, I mean, I guess the question is, does this matter anymore? Does this matter in this election?
Yes, I mean, I think that the last 4 years in particular, with Joe Biden in the White House, have kind of been like the bratty grandkids being babysat by their elderly grandfather, where they tell them, oh, we get candy for breakfast, dinner, and dessert. And all the activists have been able to grab that candy and be in charge and push on the American people opinions that aren't necessarily popular. Now, a lot of this sort of stuff, the trans issue in particular, really takes advantage of the kindness and the libertarian sort of spirit that's inherent in the American character. The United States our people have a very much live and let live. If it's not bothering me, what difference does it make? Who cares what you want to call yourself? I don't mind. That's part of our nature. But that has shifted from, hey, maybe a little toleration here for people who are suffering with mental illness or suffering with other things, to this, your kids will be taught to do this, your children will be taken away from you. You'll turn on the television and you'll see men or transsexual individuals or whatever is going on in the Olympics beating the heck out of women. And you'll sit back and say, hold on a second, who's backing this? Because Kamala Harris, the first time I ever saw a trans flag in my life, I had to Google what it was in front of her office when she was a U.S. Senator. Now it's all over where I live in Old Town Alexandria. You see it. It's been wholeheartedly endorsed by Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, and a potential frontrunner for the VP. All of these candidates have put their stamp on it, which means they have to own it.
You mentioned Josh Shapiro. We talked about him a little bit yesterday, but today we learned that he is canceling fundraisers in the Hamptons. And his spokesperson said of the cancellation that his trip was planned several weeks ago, and it included several fundraisers for his own campaign, and his schedule has changed. So is this further indication that he will be the likely VP pick?
Either that or further indication that he's in trouble. I mean, right now it's a lot of cloak and dagger. If you want Josh Shapiro to be the VP, this is your time to strike your enemies in the Democratic Party. If you want your own guy to be the VP, this is your time to lash out. There's a number of pro-Palestinian groups that really don't like Josh Shapiro that have been pushing back against him. There's an article today in the Daily Beast that says that originally had this really explosive lead. He was no longer the leading candidate to be vice president because of a sexual harassment cover-up. They had to change that lead shortly after it was published to say, well, even though he's still the leading candidate and most likely the VP, this will cause trouble for him. So there's still a lot of cloak and dagger, and I think the different teams have until the beginning of next week to really push their case.
I don't know, guys. I feel like Shapiro is the smart choice, and don't want her to make it. Don't want her to make that one.
We have all this talk about VP candidates, and there was a report from Mark Caputo saying that Donald Trump is facing loyalty problems for picking JD Vance as his VP. So how much credence should we give to all of these rumors, Chris? Because I would say DC is nothing if not rumors swirling all the time.
There are certainly rumors swirling all the time. And when you've got people in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party who are powerful operators, oftentimes you'll find that they care more about their power base and their influence than they do about whatever cause or whatever movement a lot of the activists say, or a lot of the people, all those fundraising emails you get say. Now, I saw Mark's interesting story. He's a good reporter. He really focused in, and I've heard from multiple sources since, on Kellyanne Conway, a very powerful and influential operator previously in the Trump administration, as someone who had a bone to pick. Also someone who's got very strong relationships with the media, the kind of person who would be able to do this. Now, she dismissed those charges. She called it ankle biting. But people I've talked to, well, they're rather suspicious that's the case. And, it's not healthy for our campaign to ever have this. Joe Biden's campaign was frequently doing this to Kamala Harris, undermining her, making her look foolish, anonymous leaks. And you see that now happening to Vance. And it brings to mind, in particular, the McCain-Palin campaign, where a couple of power-hungry, now never Trumper McCain advisors did everything they could to sabotage Sarah Palin on the way out. And that was disastrous. May have been helpful to them. It may have made them some extra money, but that self-serving attitude was really disastrous to the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea who's hating on who, but clearly someone, multiple people are hating on Vance. And I would say that they hate him because he's not one of them. He's not a swamp creature, and he's actually smart and capable, which is, I don't know, weird for Washington, D.C.
When he got to the U.S. Senate and he started pushing some things and he started saying, well, what most people do when they first get to Washington is, we're here to make a difference, right? Hold on, slow down. That's not what we're here to do. Don't you know that there's a train lobby that pumps millions and millions of dollars into political funds? It says, no, you're not allowed to change regulations just because we accidentally blew up a town in Ohio. So those people have been dismissive of Vance. They've been dismissive of his staff. They've been dismissive of his policies. And now those folks probably are regretting just how dismissive they were, that he's risen to still potentially betting odds favorite be our next vice president.
Well, FIFO goes west somewhere out there. Enjoy your vacation, Chris Bedford. We will see you when you get back.
I'll see you in a week.
Our next guest says that Republicans are ignoring the best strategy to beat Kamala Harris. When we return. For the past few days, we've been discussing the ins and outs of Kamala Harris's last-minute presidential campaign. But there's one part of her platform, however, that Republicans might be missing. Here to tell us what that is Terry Schilling, president of American Principles Project. And Terry, in your recent article for Blaze News, you warned Republicans against ignoring Kamala's biggest weakness. So what is that weakness?
Her biggest weakness, above all, and by the way, thank you so much for having me on, but Kamala's biggest political and policy weakness is what she has done and her record pertaining to our children and their innocence and the American family and parental rights. This is someone that from the beginning of her career, at the start when she was a DA in San Francisco, all the way up to being vice president, has done everything she could to take away parental rights, to pervert the minds of our children, and even, and this sounds totally crazy, but she was way ahead of the game on the transgender issue. All the way back in 2015, as Attorney General of California, she secured the first ever taxpayer-funded sex change procedure for a convicted felon, a convicted murderer, I'm sorry. She even gave him parole so he can go out and get the procedure. There are so many things that are radical about her, and the Republican Party, led by Donald Trump, needs to make sure that she pays a political price for this.
Terry, great to finally have you on the show. Hopefully the first of many times you can join us. This is a great piece. My question is, do you think this issue is actually big enough to affect this election? Because here's the problem. It's sort of the theme of the show today. There's all these issues where I have no doubt that most people on the right, certainly, and it seems like most people in the country are against a lot of this transgender stuff. But does it matter? Because it just keeps rolling on.
Well, it absolutely matters. And there's a blueprint for this, Matt. It's called Ron DeSantis in Florida, who won by 20 points by putting the family at the center of his campaign agenda. But also Glenn Youngkin. Right. Glenn Youngkin, just 1 year after Joe Biden was elected in Virginia by over 10 points, Glenn Youngkin turned this very deep blue state red by primarily exposing the Democratic Party for how much they want to destroy parental rights. And one thing that I'll add, because look, there are paramount issues in this election that we shouldn't ignore either. We need to attack and expose Kamala on her extremism in the economy and what she's doing to workers here, the weakening of our national defense. These are big issues, but she can explain those away. She can hide behind the media. She cannot moderate on issues pertaining to protecting children from these porn books that they have in public schools now. She can't moderate on protecting children from gender procedures that permanently sterilize them. And she certainly can't moderate or hide her position against parental rights, because that will put a major crack in the foundation of the Democratic Party. The base of the Democratic Party has been so radicalized, they don't even know what a woman is at this point.
So what should Republicans do then if you're out there? And this is a huge issue. So to not only just hit Kamala Harris, but the Democrats in general, because a lot of them are behind this. What do the Republicans need to go out there and do before November?
The biggest thing that they need to do is they need to run their own campaign ads and contact voters directly across the board. And there are lots of ways to do this. It's so cheap now compared to when I was first running campaigns. It's so cheap now to contact voters. You can send text messages out for less than 5 cents a voter contact. But we need to use our own campaign ads and our own campaigns to deliver these messages and information to voters, because the big change over the last 20 years in electoral politics in America is that the mainstream media doesn't cover bad controversy for Democrats anymore. Voters are not going to learn about how Kamala Harris will take away parental rights, continue to put porn novels in public schools, and even take away, women's sports and their opportunities there by putting men in there through the mainstream media. They're going to have to get that through alternative sources. That's why we love you guys so much. But the candidates need to do way more interviews with you guys, attacking them, get the base riled up. But also, there's a lot of swing voters out there, a lot of suburban women who are very upset about what's going on in the Olympics right now, for example. But they need to have their own campaign ads and their own campaign messages direct to voters.
Yeah, Terry, I appreciate some of the stuff you've done over the years. You've certainly been brave in getting some of these videos out there. And there really is no other way for people to see this. But let's talk about the Olympics, because everyone saw that. What just happened when a man is punching a woman in the face repeatedly. And this goes back to the previous question. Are people going to wake up to this issue now? Is this going to have some kind of effect? Because again, I think most people watching that have the same reaction we do, which is this is repulsive and this shouldn't be happening. And yet here we are.
Well, Matt, one thing that I really disagree with a lot of people in the conservative movement, the Republican, in America in general, is when I hear the word or the phrase that politics is downstream of culture, I just want to scream. It's absolutely not true. So much America was founded on politics. Politics is central. Our campaigns and elections, our legislation that we pass. America is a self-governing nation, right? The people really are in control. They're engaged, and we need to lead in politics. It gives us the best opening to fight back. So my hope and my gut, right, is that President Trump is going to champion this and make them pay a political price, because when you win a campaign and election and when you pass legislation, you have an impact on society. People want to be on the winning team. And I'll tell you what, Matt, the women's sports issue, we were on the front lines of that, and you saw that. But that issue wasn't going anywhere until two things happened. We started running millions of dollars in campaign ads during the election cycle, attacking Democrats for it. But two, and this is the most important part, President Trump, when he started speaking out about women's sports and protecting it and calling out the Democrats for being crazy, that's when we went from 9 states in the country that are protecting girls' sports to 25 today.
Terry, thanks so much for joining us, because this has been such an interesting topic, and we can't wait to have you back on here again.
Thank you so much for having me.
And yeah, the Gallup poll says that 69% of transgender athletes should only be allowed to participate in team sports that conform with their birth at gender at birth. So it's going to be one of those things where it is a winning issue for the Republicans. When we come back, we bid a fond farewell to CNN's opinion column. Just ahead. CNN has permanently axed its opinion section as part of an overall restructuring project and an effort to reduce its $43 billion debt load. It couldn't have happened to a nicer group of people. Here to discuss all of this is Blaze TV's media critic, Rob Eno. Rob, of all the things to save money on, right? Why are we going out there and getting rid of the opinion section?
I think it's really just the entire news industry, right? With Facebook and social media companies stopping people from going. I did a little bit of research before I came on, and CNN Digital, which is their written section, which is where the opinion section is coming from, is down 50 million monthly viewers or readers unique readers from 2020 to today, according to metrics. So they're way down, which means their advertising revenue's down. They said they were laying off 100 people on July 10th. This was part of that. And then, but it's weird because they've continued to say that the economy's not bad, right? But their advertising revenue is obviously down, like advertising revenue is down across the industry, across all kinds of places. The media or the people that advertise aren't getting the same return on their advertising dollars because Americans aren't spending less. So they've been lying to the American people about the economy, but they're kind of the first ones that are seeing, the events of that. That's interesting too. And then the main thing, though, is that CNN doesn't have an audience, right? All of their news is actually opinion. If you read any of their other quote unquote straight news, it's laced with opinion. So I can see them getting rid of an opinion section because it's all opinion. And there's people on the right, go to Fox News, go to places like us, Blaze News, to Blaze Media. We've actually increased our opinion section, which is, counter to what other people are doing. And then Fox News, like us, has, the right, and MSNBC has the left. CNN almost doesn't have a home. So I can see them getting rid of it. They're starting to see the economy that they've said is robust and great hitting them, which is just perfect.
So I'm of two minds on this. One is, yes, the economy is terrible throughout the entire media industry, right? But the other thing is what you're saying, which is that CNN is particularly bad. And so there's two things you need if you're going to have opinion. And you either need to be interesting and say things other people don't say, or you need to be authoritative, where it's the New York Times, so you're going to read it because they're basically credentialing people, and if it's in there, it must be important. So you're either authoritative or interesting. CNN is now neither. They're neither authoritative nor interesting. Their credibility is shot, and they're not going to say anything interesting. We already know what we're going to say when you read, as opposed to Blaze. We're both authoritative and interesting, which is why people should subscribe. And I will note, they said they had 100 people they laid off in their opinion section, possibly in this article. We have one, but we have lots of opinion, and it's good. So you need to support us for more. But I think the question is really, is this industry wide, or is that just code for CNN tanking?
I think you are seeing an industry-wide thing. I think you're seeing people getting laid off in digital news across the industry. I mean, the Washington Post just got rid of their editor and completely revamped. The other thing that's interesting with CNN is they also said that they're going to go to digital subscriptions, which is something that we at the Blaze did at the end of last year. We went to subscription on our premium news content because the advertising revenue is drying up. But if they're not interesting and there's not a reason to subscribe, people aren't going to subscribe to get they won't get opinion anymore, but to get the opinion masked as news.
Yeah, and that is exactly our value proposition. Our value proposition is we're going to get rid of ads because we know that you will support us because you're going to get content that you want. I'm curious, who is subscribing to CNN these days?
Yeah, and the other thing that we aren't doing here at Blaze Media is pushing into AI. And CNN CEO Mark Thompson said that they wanted to do this.
Right. They want to have, I guess, more fake news.
Right.
Have you read an AI news story?
Isn't that the problem already, is that people think that it's fake news,
Exactly.
and you're going to give them something that's not curated by a human, and it's put out there for the world, and they say, okay, now you have to figure out what the biases are of the AI that you're putting it into. But I mean, if you're CNN, they are probably pretty close in line with that.
Right. But there's some areas where, AI news looks like real news, like it'll take a box score and make it look like a game write-up, right? For sports and, those little blurbs that you see in news articles about, some small college in the middle of, Wyoming that doesn't get ESPN coverage. I can see things like that. It does take away jobs from humans, but there are places that use AI to do political news, to do that sort of thing, to take video from a rally and then say that this is what the person said and tries to get, the human touch is needed, I think, in news for it to be authoritative for people to understand. And that's just something that's insane to me.
Yeah. Now, CNN did a segment on Donald Trump with the Q&A that we saw at the National Association of Black Journalists yesterday. And here is how they characterized former President Donald Trump.
Every person who votes for Donald Trump is not a racist, and we have to be extremely clear about that. But Donald Trump is a racist. I recall not long ago, it was back in 2016, I believe. It was after I was on State of the Union, and there was a question about David Duke. It was before the Mississippi primary. And I called Donald Trump a racist. And David Axelrod, who I love and adore and who provides me more guidance and mentorship than I could ever be thankful for, pulled me aside and said, you have to be cautious about throwing that term out and using it in such a fashion. And so I began to say that Donald Trump uses racism as political currency.
Okay, so fair and unbiased news. Donald Trump, he's just a racist, Rob.
Right, and he's a racist for saying things that are true, right? Like yesterday, he said that illegal immigrants are taking black jobs. The Chicago mayor today went to the National Black Journalist Conference and said that Donald Trump's a racist. Now, I don't know if you've seen any of the meetings at Chicago City Hall over them increasing migrant housing. All of the African-American people are like, they're taking our jobs, and now you're giving them free stuff, and you're not investing in our community. Donald Trump said something that is actually true. If you look and you hear African-American young people, particularly in inner cities, when they get interviewed, and then people like CNN go, wow, I can't believe that they said that. Say the truth. Donald Trump knew exactly what he was doing when he went to that conference. Maybe he shouldn't have said that Kamala Harris wasn't black her whole life or something like that. That was a little crazy. I don't know, crazy, but, sometimes he gets away from himself. But most of the stuff he was saying was absolutely 100% true at that. And it's not racist dog whistles. It's something that's happening to that community. I don't know more people that are anti-illegal immigration than minority communities in inner cities in this country.
I mean, CNN, it already is AI. We already know what they're going to say. We know the algorithm they're going to lay out. Trump is racist.
That's the day. This is how we're going to end your black pill day.
I'm just saying, I'm not black pilled about this. Okay, this is good. We're going to have black pill Thursday. We're going to get a white pill Friday.
I love it.
And that's because CNN, one good thing that's happening in the world is dying and tanking. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of hard when, cable revenues go down and they don't get free money anymore. And that's kind of what they're seeing is CNN, ESPN, all of these networks are packaged as part of cable networks. And as people get rid of cable subscriptions, they're finding it hard.
Yeah, I mean, their opinion section really should just be supported by liberal NGOs. I mean, I'm sure they would pay for it, but they're the only people who are going to pay for it because it's not entertaining enough. No one cares. They're not an authority. Peace out, CNN.
And that's how we're going to end the show today. I love it. That's a good way to end it. So if you do like this show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to rate and review the show. It helps others to find it. We appreciate 5 stars. We'll be back to break it all down for you on White Pill Friday, apparently.